My name is Cassidy Lane Mercer, and I want to start by telling you something most people never say out loud. Trusting someone who shares your roof doesn't mean they deserve your trust. I learned that lesson the hard way, at 24 years old, in a two-bedroom apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, with a girl I had called my sister for 11 years. Her name was Brianna Holloway. She came into my life when I was 13 and she was 14, right after my dad married her mom, Denise. Back then, Brianna had these big brown eyes that made everyone feel sorry for her, a soft voice that made adults lean in closer, and a smile that could convince a stranger she was the most harmless person in the room. I fell for it completely. I thought we were building something real, a sisterhood that neither of us had asked for, but both of us needed. We grew up in the same house, shared the same bathroom mirror, fought over the same remote control. By the time we were adults, I genuinely believed she was my person. The sister I never had by blood, but found by luck. That belief cost me 3 years of my life. Let me paint the picture for you clearly. By the time I was 22, I had worked my way up from a part-time receptionist at a dental office to an office manager at a mid-sized marketing firm in uptown Charlotte. I wasn't rich by any stretch, but I was stable. I had a savings account that actually had savings in it. I had a 401k. I had a credit score I was genuinely proud of, 768, which for a girl who grew up in a household where money was always tight, felt like I had climbed a mountain. Brianna, on the other hand, had what our family politely called a complicated relationship with responsibility. She bounced between jobs, a barista here, a retail associate there, a brief attempt at selling skincare products online that lasted exactly 3 weeks.
She was always behind on something.
Always one crisis away from a meltdown. And somehow, I was always the one she called. I want to be honest with you. I didn't mind at first. That's what makes this story so painful. I genuinely wanted to help her. When she asked to borrow $200 in January of that year, I transferred it without hesitation. When she said she needed to put her name on my Netflix account to save money, I laughed and said sure. When she suggested we move in together to split costs, I thought it was actually a smart idea. A practical solution. 2 working adults sharing rent in a city where 1-bedrooms were going for $1,400 a month. I handed her the keys to my life, one small decision at a time. The apartment we moved into is mine. I signed the lease, I put down the security deposit, I set up the utilities in my name because Brianna said her credit wasn't strong enough. She promised to pay her half every month, cash or transfer, by the 1st. I have that in a text message. I saved it because even then, some quiet part of me knew to document things with her. For the first 3 months, it worked. She paid on time, we cooked dinner together twice a week, we watched reality TV on Friday nights, and talked about our futures. I remember thinking, this is it, we finally figured out how to be family and friends at the same time. Then in month 4, she was a week late on rent. She had a reason. A good one, she said. Her hours got cut at the restaurant where she'd just started working. I covered her half and told her to pay me back when she could. She hugged me like I had saved her life. Month 5, she was 2 weeks late. Another reason. Month 6, she stopped mentioning rent at all unless I brought it up, and when I did, the conversation always ended with me feeling guilty for asking. By month 8, I was covering nearly everything: rent, electricity, groceries. My savings account, the one I had spent 2 years building, started shrinking in ways that kept me up at night. But I kept telling myself it was temporary, that she was family, that family carries each other. What I didn't know then, what I would only discover much later, on a Tuesday morning that broke something permanently inside me, was that while I was emptying my account to keep our lights on, Brianna was quietly doing something far worse than spending my money. She was becoming me. I found out on a Tuesday in April, and I remember that detail specifically because I had just gotten off a phone call with my bank about a flag on my account. The woman on the line had a calm, professional voice, the kind that doesn't change pitch even when what she's saying is devastating. Ms. Mercer, we're seeing some unusual activity. A credit card opened in your name 14 months ago has been defaulting. The balance is currently at $9,400. Were you aware of this account? I asked her to repeat herself.
She did.
I sat in my car in the parking garage under my office building for 40 minutes after that call.
Just sat there.
Hands in my lap. The kind of still that comes over you when your brain needs a moment before it lets you feel everything. $9,400. A credit card I had never applied for. An account 14 months old. Opened, I would later confirm, just 2 months after Brianna and I moved in together. Opened using my social security number, my date of birth, my mother's maiden name, my everything. All the details a person could only know if they had spent years sitting across from you at the dinner table. I went straight to annualcreditreport.com that night and pulled all 3 of my reports. What I found made my hands shake. There were 2 credit cards I hadn't opened, a personal loan I hadn't taken, a store account at a furniture retailer I'd never stepped inside. All of it in my name. All of it maxed out or in collections. All of it dragging my credit score, my beautiful, hard-earned 768, down to a 511. 2 years of damage. Done quietly, carefully from inside my own home.
I didn't confront Brianna that night.
I want you to understand why. It wasn't because I was afraid of her. It was because I needed to be sure. I needed paper. I needed proof that was undeniable, the kind that doesn't leave room for a good reason or a tearful explanation or a hug that makes you feel guilty for being hurt. So, I spent the next week gathering everything. I called each creditor. I requested account opening records. I filed an identity theft report with the FTC online. I called the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department non-emergency line and asked what my options were. I talked to a consumer law attorney who did a free 30-minute consultation and told me exactly what I was looking at and what documentation I'd need. Then I called my dad. That phone call was the hardest thing I've done in my adult life. Not because I was scared of what he'd say, but because I could hear his voice break in real time when I walked him through the numbers. He kept saying, "Cassidy, baby, are you sure?" And I kept saying, "Dad, I have the paperwork in front of me." By Thursday, I had everything organized in a folder. Printed copies and digital backups. That Sunday, while Brianna was out, she'd mentioned something about brunch with a friend. I packed a bag of my most important things, changed the passcode on my laptop, and moved what remained of my savings into a new account she had no knowledge of. Monday morning, I filed a formal police report. Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after that first phone call from my bank, I sent Brianna a text that said, "I need you out of the apartment by Friday. Don't call me. My attorney will be in touch." She called 17 times in the next 2 hours. I let every single one go to voicemail. The last message she left was long and messy and full of crying. She said she had meant to pay it all back. She said she had been in a dark place. She said I was her sister and I was abandoning her. She said she loved me. I listened to it once, saved it as evidence, and then sat quietly in my office break room with a cup of coffee and the strangest feeling I could only describe as clarity. I had loved her too. For 11 years, I had loved her like she was mine. And that's exactly what she had counted on. Chapter 3. The confrontation that changed everything. She came back to the apartment that Monday evening before I could fully prepare myself emotionally. I had expected her to stay away, maybe crash at a friend's place, maybe sense from my text that I was serious. But Brianna had never been someone who read the room well. She walked through the front door at 6:47 p.m. with a grocery bag in one hand and her keys in the other, like it was any other evening, like I hadn't just burned the entire bridge between us to the ground that morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table, folder in front of me, hands flat on the surface. She stopped when she saw my face. "Cassidy." "Sit down," I said. My voice surprised me. It was steady, completely, unnaturally steady. She sat. She put the grocery bag on the counter first, this bizarre automatic gesture of normalcy, and then she pulled out the chair across from me and sat down slowly, like someone approaching a dog they weren't sure about. I opened the folder, and I slid the first document across the table. It was the credit report, the full one, 3 pages, with every fraudulent account highlighted in yellow. I had used a ruler to make the lines straight. I don't know why that detail mattered to me, but it did. I needed everything to be precise. I needed there to be no room for her to find a crack in my presentation and crawl through it. She looked at the paper. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she said, "I was going to tell you." And something in me, some last fragile thread of the girl who had shared a bathroom mirror with her for years, simply snapped clean. 14 months, I said. 2 credit cards, a personal loan, and a furniture account. $41,000 in total debt attached to my social security number. You were going to tell me. I needed money, Cassidy. I was drowning. I was giving you money. My voice went up slightly, and I brought it back down deliberately. Every month. Rent, groceries, utilities. I was covering you while you were opening accounts in my name and buying what? Furniture? A couch for a different apartment? What did you spend $41,000 on, Brianna? She started crying then. Real tears, the kind that came with shaking shoulders and a red nose. Under different circumstances, those tears would have worked on me. They had worked on me my entire adult life. But something had shifted permanently in the last week, and I watched her cry with nothing but exhaustion in my chest. She said she had gambling debts. Online sports betting, which she'd gotten into 18 months ago after a bad breakup. It had spiraled faster than she expected. She said she panicked. Said she only meant to use my information once, just to cover an urgent balance, and then it became a habit. She couldn't stop. She said the word sorry 11 times. I counted because counting kept me from screaming. When she finished, I closed the folder. The police report was filed this morning. I told her. My attorney has copies of everything. You have until Friday to remove your belongings. If you contest the eviction, I'll pursue every charge available to me. She stared at me like I was someone she'd never met. Maybe that was accurate. Maybe she had never actually met the version of me that didn't bend. She left that night with one suitcase. I locked the deadbolt behind her, sat down on the kitchen floor, and cried for exactly 20 minutes. Then I washed my face, made tea, and started reading everything my attorney had sent me about the identity theft recovery process. I didn't sleep well, but I slept. And in the morning, the apartment was quiet and entirely mine. Recovery from identity theft is not a dramatic single moment. Nobody shows up at your door with a check and an apology. There's no scene where everything gets reversed in an afternoon. What there is, and what nobody tells you about, is paperwork. Enormous, relentless, patience-destroying paperwork. I want to walk you through what the next 60 days looked like, because I think people deserve to know what this actually costs a person. Not just financially, but in hours and energy and emotional bandwidth. Week 1 after the confrontation, I was on the phone with creditors every single day. Each fraudulent account had its own dispute process. Each one required its own forms, its own documentation, its own reference numbers. My attorney, a woman named Patricia Osei, who specialized in consumer fraud and who I will be grateful for until I die, helped me navigate the FTC's identity theft, Gov recovery plan, and coached me through exactly what to say on each call. My credit score sat at 511 for 8 weeks while the disputes were processed. During that time, I couldn't have qualified for a car loan or a decent apartment without a cosigner. I had worked for years to build something solid, and watching it sit in ruins while bureaucratic timelines ran their course was one of the most helpless feelings I've experienced as an adult. My dad called every Sunday. He never pushed, never said, "I told you so," never once brought up the fact that he and my stepmother Denise were going through their own version of hell over this. Because Denise, Brianna's mother, had found out too. That situation was its own tragedy. Denise is not a bad person. She's a tired woman who had spent years making excuses for her daughter and was now sitting with the full weight of what those excuses had enabled. She called me once, about 3 weeks after everything came out. She was barely holding herself together on the phone. She apologized, not on Brianna's behalf, but for herself, for the times she had asked me to be patient with Brianna, for the times she had implied that Brianna's struggles were somehow my responsibility to absorb. That call mattered more to me than I expected. As for Brianna, the legal process moved forward. Because the amounts involved crossed the threshold for felony charges in North Carolina, the DA's office picked up the case. Brianna had hired a public defender. There were hearings I had to appear at, statements I had to give, Moments where I sat in a courthouse hallway and stared at the ceiling and reminded myself that I had done nothing wrong. The morning karma truly arrived, and I say karma loosely because really it was just consequences catching up. Was a Wednesday in early June. Patricia called me just after 8 in the morning while I was getting ready for work.
She took a plea, she said.
3 years probation, mandatory restitution, and a requirement to complete a financial fraud diversion program. The restitution order covers the full $41,000. I put the phone down on my bathroom counter and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. 3 years. Ironically, the exact same amount of time she had spent quietly dismantling my financial life. I won't pretend the restitution payments made everything better immediately. Court-ordered payments come in slowly, and the real repair work was already happening through the dispute process. But by the end of that summer, 11 of the 12 fraudulent accounts had been removed from my credit report. My score climbed back to 701 by September. Not where it was, but moving. More importantly, something inside me had been reorganized. I had discovered that I was more capable of protecting myself than I had ever been forced to prove before. That I could be devastated and methodical at the same time. That love for someone, even years of genuine, real love, doesn't require you to absorb their destruction quietly. I moved into a smaller apartment that fall. Just mine. My name on the lease, my credit score securing it, my first night alone in a space that held none of her energy. I bought one plant, put it on the windowsill, watched it grow. There is something that happens after a major betrayal that nobody prepares you for, and it's not the anger, which everyone expects, or the grief, which makes sense. It's the unexpected kindness. The people who appear in your life almost quietly, without announcement, and simply stand beside you while you figure out how to breathe again. The first person who showed up was my coworker, Renata Simmons. Renata was 43, a senior account strategist at our firm, and the kind of woman who wore blazers like armor and spoke in meetings with the calm authority of someone who had survived things she never advertised. We had always been friendly in the workplace. Lunch occasionally, small talk by the coffee machine, but we had never been close in the way I would have described as a real friendship. That changed on a Thursday afternoon in May, about 2 weeks after everything with Brianna exploded. I was at my desk trying to process an expense report and failing completely because my brain kept circling back to a certified mail notice I'd received that morning from a collections agency. I wasn't crying, but I was close. The kind of close where your jaw gets tight and you breathe very carefully through your nose. Renata stopped at my desk, looked at me for exactly 2 seconds, and said quietly, "Conference room B is empty. Come on." I followed her. I don't know why. I barely remember making the decision. She closed the door and she said, "You don't have to tell me anything, but you look like someone who's been carrying something alone for too long." I told her everything. In about 15 uninterrupted minutes, I laid out the entire situation. She listened without interrupting, without making any of the faces people make when they're preparing their response instead of actually hearing you. When I finished, she nodded once and said, "Okay. Do you have an attorney?"
Just like that.
Practical. Immediate. No performance of shock. No dramatic declarations of outrage on my behalf. Just, what do you need? And what's the next step? Over the following weeks, Renata became something I can only describe as a quiet anchor. She checked in without hovering. She forwarded me an article about credit recovery written by a certified financial planner without making it feel like pity. When I had to leave early one afternoon for a court-related appointment and felt embarrassed explaining it to our manager, she had already mentioned it to him before I got the chance, framing it as a scheduling matter, removing the discomfort entirely. She never made me feel like a cautionary tale. She made me feel like a competent person dealing with a complicated situation, which, I came to understand, is exactly what good support looks like. The second person was someone I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 years. My college roommate, Jade Fontaine, who lived in Atlanta and worked in healthcare administration, and who I had drifted from in the slow, unintentional way that happens when adult life fills up every available space. She saw a vague post I'd made on Instagram, nothing specific, just something about starting over, and she texted me directly. That post felt heavy. "Are you okay?" Simple question. 4 words. I sat with my phone in my hand for a minute before I answered honestly, and that one honest answer reopened a friendship I hadn't realized how deeply I missed. Jade drove up from Atlanta on a Saturday in late May with an overnight bag and an aluminum pan of her grandmother's baked mac and cheese. She stayed 2 nights. We stayed up until 2 in the morning both evenings talking through everything, not just Brianna, but the patterns that had led me here. The way I had trained myself to equate helping with loving. The way I had confused someone needing me with someone valuing me. The way I had mistaken Brianna's dependency for intimacy. That conversation, more than any legal document or credit dispute, was where the actual healing started. Jade had this way of asking questions that made you think rather than just vent. At one point she said, "If a friend had described your situation to you 2 years ago, someone covering rent, utilities, groceries, while that same person quietly opened accounts in her name, what would you have told that friend?" I didn't answer right away, because the answer was so obvious it embarrassed me. I would have told her to run. I sat with that for a long time after Jade went home. I sat with the understanding that I had applied a completely different standard of protection to myself than I would have applied to anyone I loved. That somewhere along the way, I had decided that my own well-being was negotiable in a way that other people's wasn't. That realization didn't feel good, but it felt necessary, like setting a broken bone, painful in the moment, but the only path to walking straight again. By the end of May, I had also started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Anita Voss, and she worked out of a small office in South End, Charlotte, with big windows and plants on every surface. I want to mention this without making it sound like a commercial for therapy, but simply because it was real and it helped. Having a professional space to process the intersection of financial trauma and relational betrayal, to untangle what was grief and what was anger and what was simply exhaustion, gave me language for things I had been feeling but couldn't organize. Dr. Voss said something in our 3rd session that has stayed with me. Betrayal by someone we love doesn't just damage our trust in them. It temporarily damages our trust in our own judgment. The work is learning to trust yourself again. That was it exactly. That was the real injury underneath everything else. By July, the apartment that had once felt too quiet started feeling like mine in a way that was genuine rather than just functional. I had stopped hearing Brianna's absence as silence and started hearing it as peace. That shift happened gradually, and then all at once, the way most important internal changes do. I want to be honest about the timeline of financial recovery because I think people deserve realistic expectations rather than a satisfying, but misleading narrative. Things did not fix themselves quickly. The dispute process was slow. Restitution payments from Brianna came in small monthly amounts through the court system, nothing that dramatically changed my monthly budget. What actually rebuilt my financial life was the same thing that had built it in the first place: consistent, unglamorous work over time. I picked up a freelance project management contract through a contact Renata introduced me to. It ran 3 months and added meaningful income that went entirely into rebuilding savings. I put myself on a strict but livable budget using an app my therapist had mentioned another client found helpful. Nothing deprivation-based, just clear and honest tracking of where every dollar went. Seeing the numbers move in the right direction, even slowly, repaired something in my relationship with my own finances that the theft had damaged beyond just the credit score. My score crossed 720 in October. I texted my dad a screenshot. He sent back a voice memo of himself cheering, and I played it 3 times. What I want to tell you about rebuilding, the real texture of it, is that it happens in small moments that don't announce themselves. It happens the first time you check your credit report and feel curiosity instead of dread. It happens when a friend asks if you need anything and you actually answer honestly instead of saying, "I'm fine." It happens when you realize you've gone an entire evening without thinking about Brianna at all, and then you realize that a month ago, that would have been impossible. I thought about forgiveness a lot during those months. Not the kind that means what she did was acceptable, or that I owe her a restored relationship, or that the damage she caused was somehow erased. I thought about the kind of forgiveness that is really just the decision to stop letting someone live rent-free in the space where your peace of mind should be. I wrote her a letter in September. I never sent it. That wasn't the point. The point was to say everything I needed to say in a space where her response couldn't reach me. No tears, No explanations, no manipulation. Just my words, my experience, my truth, documented for myself. When I finished writing it, I folded it and put it in a drawer and went to make dinner, and I noticed halfway through chopping vegetables that I was humming. Quietly, absently, the way you do when your body has decided it's safe to relax before your brain catches up. I took that as a sign. By November, I was a different version of myself than I had been a year earlier. Not harder, which is what people sometimes assume trauma does to you.
More honest, maybe.
More boundaried. Better at recognizing the difference between love and liability. Better at understanding that generosity given from a place of guilt or fear is not actually generosity. It's just another name for letting yourself be used. Renata and I had dinner at a nice restaurant in Noda to celebrate my credit score milestone. Jade came up from Atlanta for my birthday in December, and we spent the day doing absolutely nothing important and laughing more than I had laughed in a year. My dad and I talked more regularly than we had in years, the crisis having cracked open a closeness between us that distance and busyness had slowly sealed shut. These were not small things. These were everything.
And Brianna?
She existed somewhere in the city, navigating probation and court dates, and the specific consequences of choices she had made. I heard through my stepmother Denise, who remained in my life carefully, tenderly, still figuring out how to be my family while being Brianna's mother, that Brianna had started the court-required financial counseling program and was, apparently, finally engaging with it seriously.
I didn't feel vindicated by that.
I didn't feel angry, or sad, or relieved. I felt, mostly, nothing, and I had learned by then that nothing after years of too much can be its own kind of gift. My plant on the windowsill had grown 3 new leaves since September. I noticed that every morning while I made coffee, and every morning it felt like something. It felt like proof that things grow back. Did I want to tell you about a Saturday in February? Not because anything dramatic happened that day. No courtroom, no phone call from an attorney, no crisis to manage or document to file. It was an ordinary Saturday, gray sky, cold enough to keep the windows shut, the kind of quiet morning that asks nothing from you. I woke up at 8 without an alarm, made coffee in the small French press Jade had given me for my birthday, sat on my couch with both hands wrapped around the mug, and watched the light come through the window and land across my plant, which had, by this point, grown so full and unruly that I'd had to buy a second pot and divide it. And I realized sitting there that I was happy. Not the loud, announcement-worthy kind of happy that makes you want to post something. The quiet kind. The kind that lives in your chest like a small, steady warmth. The kind that doesn't need anything from anyone to keep going. It took me a few minutes to recognize it, honestly, because it had been a while. 3 weeks before that Saturday, I had seen Brianna. I want to be clear, I did not seek her out. I was not ready for a conversation, and I had not planned one. I was leaving a pharmacy in a neighborhood I didn't usually frequent, coat collar up against the February wind, thinking about nothing more significant than whether I needed to stop for groceries, when I heard someone say my name. She was standing about 15 feet away on the sidewalk. She looked different, thinner, tired in a way that sat behind her eyes. She was carrying a paper bag and wearing a coat I didn't recognize, and she looked, more than anything else, uncertain, like someone who had rehearsed something and suddenly couldn't remember the first line. I stopped. I didn't walk toward her, but I didn't walk away. For a moment neither of us said anything, and in that silence I felt every version of the past between us. The 13-year-old girl who had shared my bathroom, the young woman who had cried on my couch after breakups, and the person who had typed my social security number into a credit application while I slept 20 feet away in the next room. All of it existed at the same time, layered and complicated, and entirely real. I'm not going to ask you for anything, she said finally. Her voice was quieter than I remembered. I wanted to say that I know what I did. Not the legal version of knowing. Actually knowing. I held her gaze and waited. I told myself a lot of stories about why it was okay, she continued. That I would pay it back. That you had more than me. That you wouldn't even notice for a while.
She paused.
None of it was true. I knew it wasn't true when I was doing it. I did it anyway. That last sentence landed differently than any apology she had ever offered me. Because it wasn't an explanation, and it wasn't an excuse, and it didn't ask me to understand or forgive or feel sorry for her. It was simply an admission, clean and uncomfortable, with nowhere to hide inside it. I took a breath. I know, I said. I think I've known that for a while. I'm working on it, she said. The counseling program. It's harder than I expected, figuring out why I make the choices I make. Good, I said. And I meant it. Not for my sake. My life had already rebuilt itself around her absence. But because she was a human being, and human beings deserve the chance to understand themselves before they cause more damage. To themselves or anyone else. We didn't hug. We didn't exchange numbers. She gave me a small nod and I gave her one back and we walked in opposite directions and that was that. I sat in my car afterward and waited to feel something significant. Some wave of emotion that matched the weight of the moment. But what I felt was mostly just calm. A sense of things being complete, not resolved in a fairy tale way, but complete in the way that a chapter is complete when you finally close the book and set it down. That evening I called my dad and told him about the encounter. He listened carefully and then said, "How do you feel?" "Okay," I told him. "Really okay." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm proud of you, Cass. Not for forgiving her, not for being the bigger person. I'm proud of you for protecting yourself. For not letting what she did make you bitter. That's hard to do." I've thought about those words many times since. Because he was right, that was the thing I was most proud of too. Not the credit score recovery, as satisfying as that had been. Not the legal outcome, as necessary as it was. The thing I was most proud of was that I had walked through the worst betrayal of my adult life, and come out the other side without becoming someone I didn't recognize. Without building walls so high that nothing good could get in. Without deciding that because one person had treated my trust like a resource to extract, everyone else would too. Renata was still my friend. Jade and I had already booked flights to visit each other in spring. My dad and I talked every week. Dr. Voss and I had recently shifted to bi-weekly sessions because, as she put it, I had done significant work and it showed. My apartment was small and entirely mine. My savings account had crossed the 5-figure mark again in January, slowly, consistently, through my own effort. My credit score sat at 731 on the last report I'd pulled, and every month that number was a quiet reminder that what someone breaks in you, you can rebuild stronger if you're willing to do the work. So here is what I want to leave you with, not a moral delivered from a distance, but something I actually believe from having lived it. People will sometimes take from you. Not because you were naive or careless or too loving, but because they chose to. That choice belongs entirely to them. What belongs to you is everything that comes after. How you document, how you protect yourself, how you grieve the relationship honestly without letting the grief eat your future, how you extend trust again carefully and with open eyes rather than shutting the door on everyone who comes after. You are not responsible for other people's choices. You are responsible for what you build after them. I watered my plant that Saturday morning and noticed it needed a bigger pot again. I smiled at that, alone in my quiet apartment with my coffee cooling on the table, and I added my larger pot to my phone notes, and I felt, from the inside of an ordinary February morning, completely and entirely fine. Better than fine. I felt like myself. The version of myself I had been working toward without knowing it, clearer, steadier, more honest about what I need and what I deserve, and where the line between the two sits. That version of Cassidy Lane Mercer? She took a long time to arrive, and she was absolutely worth waiting for.